That's where I'm stuck here too. I grew up in the suburbs. Charlie grew up in Buckingham. I mean, he started out in the city, which, by the way, is the reason why we ended up back here, basically, because he was very comfortable in his first 5 years of living there. And, his grandparents, he remembers every piece of furniture, da da da. It was, very meaningful for him. So for him to decide to possibly come back to the city to start a family was kind of a no-brainer. For me, it was a stretch, quite
Where's
honestly.
Buckingham?
Buckingham is right outside of Doylestown. It's north, north. If you take 611 straight up, you're going to hit Doylestown. And Buckingham is like, you veer off a little bit. It's like a suburb of Doylestown, Spring Valley, actually. So it was kind of a farmhouse type of thing,
Yeah.
about a quarter acre of land. 5 boys grew up in the woods. It was a wonderful experience for him. But he loved the city. So he talked me into trying to find a house to buy here, which we did. And we did really well. Huge twin with 3 floors and a basement, a finished attic, the whole nine. It was very affordable. It was on Tabor Road. That's what brought us here, was housing in
So
particular.
let's stop and go chronologically speaking. So let's start in the middle, which is you moved to Olney in 1980.
1980. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and how old were both you two at that time? In your 20s?
Yes, in our 20s, mid 20s,
Okay,
or maybe late 20s, because I had Jack in the next year, and I had him. Well, I was 29 when he was born, so
okay,
late 20s.
okay. And then so your first home is on Tabor Road in Olney.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so previous to that, okay,
We were in. We moved,
where does your history and Charlie's timeline come together?
we started out at Bucks Community College together.
Okay.
I mean, we were in drawing classes. That's how we got to know each other. And so it started with the art, and we eventually started, dating, and that's when they dated back in the olden days. Took me out for a drink or a dinner. Um, so we dated, and then eventually ended up living in the same farmhouse together for a year or so, and then we got married. Got in our own little apartment in Newtown. Had our first child, our daughter, and then we were in an apartment. We thought we should look for housing, something to put our hard-earned money into to keep. So that's when we started looking in Philadelphia for a place to live. That's what
And
happened.
and so Charlie grew up in Buckingham near Doylestown, and you said you were originally from
I was from
Ohio?
Ohio. Yeah, my father worked as an industrial engineer who was. They moved him around a lot. We moved several times, and one of the moves was from Toledo, Ohio, to Yardley, Pennsylvania. That's the one that brought us to the East Coast from the Midwest. I guess it's the Midwest, right?
Mhm.
Ohio. So culture shock. It was hard. Whew, hard.
Uh-huh.
Have you been through the middle of the country? It's they're just really nice people there. It's really calm and quiet. Maybe it's a little backward, maybe it's a little slow and not very sophisticated, but I'll tell you, it's warmer. Come to the East Coast and everybody's like in a hurry, and everything has to be done yesterday. It was a big difference in attitude.
And you moved to Yardley when you were a teenager?
Yeah, I was in 8th grade.
Oh, okay, middle school.
Yeah, middle school.
Junior high, I should say. Back then it's called junior high.
Yeah, it was junior high. Yeah, I was, and that was kind of a sad time in my life, because it's a really tough time to make a move. In the middle of the school year, by the way, where I just felt so self-conscious, I almost died. I really did. Oh, there's the new girl. Ugh. Ugh. It was not fun. No fun at all. I got used to it though. Now I wouldn't be anywhere else. Well, that's Yes, I would be a lot of other places, but I like Philly a lot, a lot.
And I'm also curious to hear about the fact that you both went to art school. Um, what were you both studying? And then, yeah, what were
He's,
you both studying?
he's mostly painting. He was a painter, and I was. I'd have to say my stuff was more like illustration and sculpture. I was more into the sculpture than he was, but so he wasn't in any, as I recall, any of those classes. But we drew together a lot because we had the same instructor who was just marvelous, opening person, wonderful. I learned a lot. A couple of years there.
Yeah, I'm a visual art major myself, so
Yeah,
yeah.
it's wonderful. It really is. It's served me well, I'll tell you.
So 1980, you move into Olney at Tabor. So Tabor's, I guess, the southern Olney. It's the southern end of the neighborhood.
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. We were very close to Fifth. We were very close to the library, actually.
Oh, okay.
We were right at you know where Fairhill is. It's
Yes.
the next street over. We were right there.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
yeah, Fairhill and Tabor kind of thing.
Hmm. And
Hmm.
how long did you live in that residence?
I think it was around 4 years. 4 years, and we we had a very quick and disappearing opportunity. Disappeared for a job in California for Charlie with someone who was starting a new business. It was one of those, when you're young and somewhat foolish, but wanting to try everything. We were going to, pick up stakes and move to California, and of course it fell through after we sold our house. So we were renting for a while, and then we bought another house quickly, which I didn't love. It was okay, it was adequate, but then we visited some friends on this block during a Super Bowl game, and I was admiring their home so much. I loved everything about them, the layout, the woodwork, everything. And they told us that the house across the street had just gone up for sale. So I made an appointment, looked at it, and bought it in 2 days. Yeah, we didn't even need a new house, but I wanted. I
And
promised Charlie the last thing I'd ask him for. Please let me have this house. Oh my God. I just loved it so much. So much light, so different from the one that we were selling. Which, by the way, did not sell at the last minute. So we had two houses for a year. That was interesting. It
and,
went okay.
and the interim house was also in Olney too.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, we haven't been outside of Olney since '80. Yeah.
The neighborhood that you live in, which is the one north of Fisher Park, is there a name for it? Because
They
I
call it
heard
Fisher
that it
Park.
feels like a little enclave, like a
Hmm.
little.
It is. It's kind of tucked away. Uh, Tim Bathurst, was at one point a real estate agent.
Mhm.
I guess you know that. He discovered, or I don't think he made it up, but I've heard that they call this area Fisher Park.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's pretty neat.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's well, Fisher Park is the southern
Yeah.
boundary, North Fifth
Hmm.
Street on the east. What's the northern street that cuts off you from Oak Lane?
Godfrey?
Godfrey, right?
Hmm.
And then the railroad tracks, more or less.
Right.
Yeah,
Correct. Hmm.
yeah. That I always, every time I visit that area, visit you or wander around that part of Fisher Park, it's just feels like a little nook.
It's yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it is.
Gotta-
It really kind of is. And the people, if one of your questions was going to be, I guess, how would you describe your neighborhood and your neighbors? I was thinking about that, and I would have to say it's fairly quiet here and fairly conservative.
Mhm.
We don't have, at least currently don't have any goofballs, who are like blaring music past 11 or any of that. We have lived in Olney in many places where that happened. I guess they all moved out, thank God. But it's quiet. It's respectful. People are, they acknowledge each other when they pass each other. you know, my particular street is pretty friendly among each other. You know, we all get along, and I can't, you know, it's really in that way. It's kind of nirvana, in a nirvana of neighborhoods for
And
me.
as far as like different locations you've lived in Olney, um, what are the changes that you've experienced in those locations, or has Olney as a whole changed pretty much evolved as cohesively speaking, in terms of makeup, or you know, just
Um,
yeah, the residents?
are you talking about
I guess
demographics?
demographically speaking, like from 1980 to 2020, that's 40 years.
It's changed a lot, a
Yeah.
lot. Yeah, a lot. Um, Somewhere around 1982 or three is when the Korean influx began, where this our neighborhood, you know, most of Olney was basically white, white German background. I mean, if you were talking about people who grew up here, grew up in the city, most of them were, from what I understand, you know, German Irish descent. Um, and then for whatever, I'm not sure what the reason was per se at the time, but the Korean community started to buy up properties and buy up, they started to become the business corridor owners, I guess they are. I'm not sure if they're owners or not, but they conducted business up there. What didn't go well about that, and why there was a lot of discord, and eventually people did start to move out, partly because of that, was that there was no discourse between, you know, the Korean community and the existing community to say, hey, here we are, you know. There was, and frankly, nobody knew how to do that, because I mean, from the other side, if you will, the older residents had no way of knowing what was really happening. It was kind of, it would almost felt insidious, you know. Why aren't we talking about this? You know, all of a sudden, there were a lot of stores that you really couldn't even use because you had to have a membership, or they were wholesale. Yeah, and it was very off-putting. Um, and I was raising kids, little kids at the time, and became less and less, you know, attractive to walk up and down Fifth Street and take them into stores and that kind of thing. Um, and then I don't know. Then we had an influx of black ownership. I think ownership in particular of these homes, and that started another problem in our neighborhood. I'm sure it was pretty widespread in terms of bigotry and, you know, just long-standing assumptions and all this other kind of stuff. And we had a huge white flight off of my block after we moved here. It was probably a year later. A couple of black families, they had already moved in, but you know, as others started to move in, the white families said, not going to live this way.
And
And
this
they,
was 19, like late 80s.
this would be the, no, right around 1990. 1990?
90s. Okay.
Yeah, right around 1990. Right, that's 1992, 3. And I have never seen anything happen so quickly. I mean, I've heard of it. The term white flight
Yeah.
is true. I mean, they would put their houses on the market and be out of there literally within a month. And this happened, I'm going to count, I mean, they were friends of mine, I mean, neighbor friends. At least 5 families did that. Like, boom.
Yeah.
You know, that's all. One starts, you know, it's literally a flight, and it was hard to watch, very disconcerting, sad.
Yeah.
And we hung out and just tried to, you know, stabilize. I got very involved with the park, you know, and we formed a group of people, community folks on each of the blocks. We had block captains at that point. So the block captains got together in the 6100 area between the Park and Godfrey, and we would meet. I think it was at least once a month or something. And we formed to try to get the park situated back on its feet, cleaner and all. I mean, at that point, people were actually putting burned out cars in the park, and oh yeah, it was really bad. There were needles. It was the drug war era.
Mm-hmm.
So we went in with our rubber gloves and cleaned up and did these monthly cleanups as the 6,100 neighbors. And it paid off. The city started to notice that we were that busy with each other and caring that much about our neighborhood. And they started to channel some funds into our programming. At that point, it was, what's her name? Councilwoman, she preceded Parker.
Tasco.
Yeah.
Tasco.
Councilwoman Tasco took a shine to the work we were doing, and she made sure that we had plenty of money to, feed our volunteers and that kind of thing. And she helped us financially to build that garden, the community garden. So that was really cool. And that well, not only education, obviously, and growing food, but a big reason for putting that there was to cement our relationship, or not cement, begin to the thaw of the relationship between the neighborhood and the Korean population. We were really trying to attract people, who felt disenfranchised in the area. In one way, in the only way that we could think of to do it, was horticulture.
Yeah.
Everything else requires, some form of communication that we weren't prepared to address yet. So it was our idea that we would combine the different cultures that way, and with mild success, it worked. I'm not going to say it was screaming success. It wasn't, but it helped. And I know it's helped the neighborhood to have that garden there in general.
And when did some of the more recent immigrants start to move in, like the Caribbeans, or the Jamaicans, or folks from the Caribbean, Latino folks? I'm assuming the Cambodians and Vietnamese were also part of some refugee settlements, resettlement back in the 80s, even.
Yes, I think they've been moving up for many years, like since we moved here to this house in 1990. That's about when the influx was I guess at its height. I didn't get super involved in what was happening in the lower end of the corridor, really.
Mm-hmm.
I've used to go to Tia Colombiana restaurant, which is really delicious. But that was about it. The only reasons why I would go down, go further south on Fifth Street would be to for a restaurant.
Right.
Eating. Other than that, so I don't know really. I didn't follow the demographics that closely at that point. But we had the Korean Community Center, Korean community.
Yeah, Korean Center.
Yeah, right across from the park, and that was what I thought would be a good way to, sort of break down those barriers. So we did go there first to try to find a way to share the garden with Korean community. But as obviously, it's not just servicing Koreans. It's for anybody. Yeah.
And actually, it's a good segue to talk about Fisher Park and the garden. I mean, that to me is a community cultural tradition. I mean, at its height, were there some interesting things that were grown there by different kinds of people that you learned about?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, like what?
Well, our Our best, best in quotes, gardeners are a Korean family, the Kangs, and they grew year round, and they knew what they were growing all the time. It was just amazing. It was always green, even in the winter. They were just amazing. I don't know how, as far as identification, they grew mostly things that we would, but you know how I guess your typical American gardener wants to grow tomatoes and peppers. That's not what they weren't worried about that at all. They were growing other things that greens and those kinds of things that they cooked with. So it was neat. It was really neat. They were there for several years.
And then any other traditions, any African American or Spanish speaking cultures that grew things that were maybe different than, I don't know, that were unique to their culture that you've had there?
Well, definitely collard greens.
Okay.
Collard greens are a big they're a big deal. But they're very hard to grow because they're subject to infestation, and so that again, with mild success, we've managed to bring that piece of culture into the equation. Well, everybody loves collard greens, but I think they're traditionally grown in the South, and a lot of people while they're gardening, we'll talk about how they really, at least their grandparents were agrarian. They farmed, so they brought that with them. The love of the earth and feeding their families from the soil.
Did you have that as a tradition in your family as far as growing things, or is that something you acquired?
My father was he was an avid gardener, but I think he for him it seemed like it was a hobby more than it was anything else. I mean, he would grow unusual things. He had a huge garden. I like to run around on the tractor that he had for that, but I didn't. I don't think I had the patience to be a gardener at that point in time. I wanted to climb trees and run around.
So when you were growing up in the Midwest, it was fairly rural.
I was in a small town, and right on the outskirts. I mean, just a few doors away was the farms, many corn, lots and lots and lots and lots of corn, flat, which I have to say is a big difference between the middle of the country and here. It's beautifully mountainous around here. I mean, it doesn't, hills, and I love hills and mountains, and oh boy, Ohio is flat.
So when it sounds like you, as a part of your community activism and your proximity to Fisher Park, that's kind of spurred you to, stick your hands into the soil more and learn about, yeah.
Yes. And I think my commitment to the garden was always more in the community area than it was as a gardener. I'm learning as I go. I actually, for the first year, this year, I'm growing lettuce from seed. It's only been 20 years, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say that I'm a very good gardener at all, but I like community. I like to bring community together, enjoying themselves with each other. So that's my main focus there, personal focus. Still is. I'm working on it.
Yeah, in the 80s and early 90s, was the creek that ran through Fisher Park, was that already buried?
Yeah, that was already buried, but they were getting, let's see, just as we moved there, I don't know when they stopped it up, but there was a spring that people used to bring bottles and things and fill them up and put them in wagons and take them home, spring water. Right down there at the bottom, right where the bowl is.
Yeah.
It was right there.
But obviously it's not there anymore.
Famous.
Yeah.
Anybody you talk to who grew up in Olney would remember that happened, because that was pretty cool.
Were there any other community-based cultural traditions, annual ones that were happening, let's say in the 80s and 90s, that aren't really happening now anymore?
We we used to they would close down Fifth Street for several blocks and have a parade. It was a baby parade with bikes and stuff, children bikes. I think they called it Super Sunday, Olney Super Sunday, and then it would end up in the park.
Huh.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it was neat. It was, a real parade. Olney, marching band, the whole nine. You
But
know,
the theme was children, babies.
this the theme was community. The baby parade was just to show off the babies, which were adorable. I might even have a picture. Where did I don't know. The old Omni Times definitely has pictures of all that stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
That can be. I don't know if it's searchable online. I don't know if it was digitized. It should be. That's for sure. But anyway, I'm positive that that's been written up, and that Super Sunday was written up every year.
And do you remember like who organized it, or is it just sort of a natural?
No, yeah. I don't know if you've heard the term Mansdorfer. Have you heard of Eugene Mansdorfer?
The name rings a bell, but I couldn't tell you.
Or Mr. Olney or something. He was very patriotic, and I think this, as a matter of fact, he had another event on the 4th of July in the park. He and his, friends. Let's see, I'm trying to think. He was with the veterans. Just a group of mostly men ran these things, and their wives would, do the baking and
Mm.
that kind of stuff. Very, very classic
Yeah, yeah.
50s stuff. Yeah, it was pretty old fashioned when we moved here, and then it quickly evolved into a cosmopolitan area. Hmm. That
Um,
kind of thing has been a thing of the past for a long time. That was in the 80s.